Welcome to the Freedom to Learn podcast. I'm your host, Ginny Gentles. This season, we're diving into what it means to return education to states, communities, and families. And we're exploring what becomes possible when education is freed from union dominance and federal control. In a recent tweet, Danyela Souza Egorov wrote, "Next year, New York City is losing 4% of its students. The budget is growing 8%. Make it make sense." Danyela joins me today to discuss New York City's multiple crises: shrinking enrollment and increasingly empty school buildings, soaring spending, chronic absenteeism, and families fleeing the system. Danyela urges city leaders to make responsible decisions rather than continuing to bankroll failure to the tune of $42,000 per pupil. We talk about how foolish COVID-era policies reshaped public education, why parents are demanding more options, and what the federal scholarship tax credit could mean for New York families seeking educational freedom in the form of tuition, tutoring, and a wide variety of educational expenses. As a fellow at the Manhattan Institute, Danyela writes about education policy and school choice. She's also the vice president of New York City's Community Education Council District 2 and the founder of Families for New York. Danyela Souza Egorov, welcome to Freedom to Learn.
Thank you for having me.
Danyela, I've been following your work from afar for a while. You might not know that. And I so admire your commitment to New York City, to schools in the city, to students, to families, and the various hats that you wear and roles that you play. We're going to talk mostly from your perspective as a Manhattan Institute fellow, but you have gotten involved in education in New York in other ways. Can you talk a little bit about your other roles?
Yes. I started getting involved in education through charter schools. So I started my career at Boston Public Schools, and I was responsible for helping create the first in-district charter. And I watched the impact that the charter model had on a school that was previously failing. And so then I spent the next 10 years of my career just really helping educators create charter schools. So that's how I came to this work. And then I had kids of my own and started dealing with public schools in New York City. And the year that my son entered a really wonderful gift and talent program here was the year that Mayor de Blasio started to dismantle those programs. And so I got very involved on the gifted and talent fight here and got elected to the Community Education Council, which is the equivalent of the school board here in New York City 5 years ago. So I've been serving on that board for 5 years and helping parents there. And I started to write about education because especially during COVID, I was so frustrated about the coverage or the lack of coverage about what was happening to our kids and the school closures. And that's how, I became a researcher at the Manhattan Institute.
Well, in that time, things have changed in New York for a variety of reasons, and families, from what I understand from your writing, from others' writing, families have left the public schools due to the displeasure with how things happened during the COVID years. They've moved out of the city for a variety of reasons, and we have the birth dearth. So you've been writing about these New York City enrollment trends and the fact that the budget is going up while projected enrollment is going down. Talk to us a little bit more. I listed some of the reasons that things are shifting with enrollment. What's the comprehensive list? Like what's driving this decline in enrollment in the city?
I think it's a combination of factors. Definitely, demographics is a huge factor. The city today has roughly 25,000 fewer births than it had 20 years ago. So there are just fewer kids in the city to begin with. On top of that, as you said, many families, particularly with young kids, are choosing to leave the city. So we saw just a year ago a huge drop in the number of pre-K and K students. The city lost 3,500 students just in 1 year in pre-K and kindergarten, which I think is a good indication showing that when people are about to enter kindergarten, they are leaving the city, right? And so, New York has a huge out migration problem, and that I think includes a lot of families with kids. But there's also the fact that people are leaving the public schools, even the families that are here. So we have seen dramatic increase in charter schools. Really,
Mhm.
families are choosing more charter schools. Homeschooling has grown a lot since 5 years, even though New York is a state that is not very friendly to homeschoolers. And particularly this year, I think this is a new trend. The private schools have seen a huge increase in applications as well. And so I think it's a combination of factors of demographics, but also families are not happy with what New York City public schools are offering to them.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about the demographics when it comes to the birth dearth, to the demographic cliff. This isn't just a New York City problem. It's something that we talk about on the podcast. I hope enough for listeners to understand that this is a widespread, serious problem that needs to be looked at and actions need to be taken. My spiel is that I always say people stopped having as many babies in 2008. Is that how you describe it? Or do you have a maybe more technical way of describing what's happened there?
So in New York City in particular, there is a huge drop in the number of births, particular right after COVID. That's where we see like a big drop. But it was kind of a steady trend downwards if you look at the in 20 years. But I think COVID really accelerated that trend. But I agree with you. It's not just a problem in New York City. I have said before, I think being the mayor or the school chancellor in a large urban district over the next 20 years is going to mean managing decline in enrollment. And,
Mhm.
that will probably include a combination of closing schools or really trying to make your school so attractive that you can at least have stable enrollment.
So that's not what's happening in New York City. You wrote in a piece recently about decisions that actually do the opposite, right? They're not closing schools. So can you tell us a little bit about what's happening on that front? Is anybody suggesting, "Hey, let's be responsible and let's consolidate schools. Let's address this head on"?
So New York City is the New York City education budget is just a conundrum because the budget keeps growing. It has grown by at least $1 billion every year for the last 5 years. And this last proposed budget include a growth of $3 billion. So we're going to be around 38, $39 billion in the budget. At the same time, we have had huge decline in enrollment.
Right.
So the school construction authority just put out a report 2 weeks ago saying that they predict that over the next 10 years New York City is going to lose 150,000 students. That will make the district roughly 650,000 students. And if you look at if that becomes a reality, and if we look at that in a period of 15 years, the district will become literally half of what it was. And so
Before COVID?
Bef- well, in fifth, yes, exactly, before COVID. So um, it's not that I always joke that if all this money was getting us like amazing academic results for our kids, I would not be writing. But our results are mediocre. We're middle of the pack on NAEP, and it's not getting better. And so it's just the schools are just getting more and more money to educate fewer kids and producing the same mediocre results that we had before COVID. A big part of this it is because the budget of schools it's not tied to enrollment anymore. It used to be before COVID, but now since COVID, some schools experienced such dramatic drop in enrollment, and the city did what they call the hold harmless
Full time,
policies,
yeah.
which was supposed to be a 1 year policy, but it has become permanent now, and it's cost the city roughly $400 million every year to keep these schools floating, even though they have experienced dramatic enrollment drops.
And when you say dramatic enrollment drops, keeping the schools going, they're holding schools harmless, even though the schools are at less than 60% capacity, less than 50% capacity. You're talking about buildings that are really emptying out, right?
Yes. So roughly one quarter of our schools are operating below 60% capacity. I have written a lot about what a friend of mine said. It's unintentional micro schools. So we have We had this year, we had 112 schools that were projected to have fewer than 150 students. And next year is going to be 134 schools. So it keeps growing every year, the number of schools that are going to have fewer than 150 students.
Oh.
And a few of these schools are designed to be small because they are serving specific populations with, maybe with special needs. But the vast majority are small because of enrollment decline.
I'm trying to understand the governance structure a little bit in the city. Is there an office that is saying, look, we've got to tackle this? City comptroller, I think, was acknowledging that this is a reality. Does he have any power, though, in the governance structure?
So we have a new city controller this year who has been doing, I think, a really remarkable job, especially compared with our previous controller. He's trying to say, look, pay attention to these problems in the fiscal situation of the city, and the GOE is a big part of that. The Department of Education represents 1/3 of the budget, roughly, of the city.
Wow.
And he has pointed a number of things that are driving the increasing cost. He said about the schools that are empty. He talked about the dramatic increase in spending on what's called harder cases, which is when families sue the district because their students with special education are not being served, and so then the city has to pay private school to these students. And so he has really shined a light on this problem. The current chancellor actually was a school superintendent before, and he managed decline enrollment. He proposed some mergers. He has had 5 months in this job now, and he has not been able to really propose. He proposed actually some closures, but he had to pull back on that because as you know, school closures are very difficult. I always say it was my first job actually at Boston Public School was to close schools. So I
Oof.
know, yeah, it was baptism by fire. I know how hard it is. And I'm also very cognizant of the problem that it really has an impact on students, right? But I think, unfortunately, for New York City and many other districts, this is a reality that we cannot avoid. And I think not closing schools is going to become more damaging to students because what we are doing is we're spreading the budget so thinly across so many schools that are half empty. And we're not really delivering the best education that we could for our students.
Who ultimately makes these decisions? Outside of New York, we only hear about the mayor, right? And I think some of that is like cult of personality, like he's interesting. And so there are lots of headlines and social media clips about him. But you're talking about a complex, massive system within a complex, massive city. So the comptroller's calling attention to it. You have a role as a school board member. Others probably are trying to call attention to this. Is it up to the mayor ultimately to make a fiscally responsible decision?
So I think it's a combination of the mayor and the city council that really,
Okay.
decide the budget of the city. But in specifically for education, we have what's called the panel of education policy. So, the board that I serve is just on an advisory role. All the parents are only on advisory roles on the community education councils. But the PEP, which is the panel of education policy, really is the one that make decisions. And the people who are there are appointed by the controller, by the mayor, the borough president. So we have 5 boroughs, and each president appoints one member there. So it is a very, in a way, decentralized infrastructure. The governance model, you cannot just say it's one person. But I think definitely the mayor has a leading role. He appoints the majority of people at the PEP, and he could definitely make sure that this is a priority for us to really right size the district and then allow to make investment on the schools that we know are delivering good results for kids. There are schools in New York City that are over enrolled, right? There are schools that have waiting lists that people wanted to be expanded. But these are very difficult decisions, but I definitely think that it is the mayor who has the ultimate responsibility here.
What role do parents play in this? Like you said, school closures, school consolidations, that's a tough thing to pull off. And often it's parents pushing back and saying, "Wait, that's our neighborhood school. We moved here for a reason. We're connected to this. We have history here." Like how do you communicate to parents who are also taxpayers, we've got to do this?
So I think parents are speaking in the most profound way when they choose a school, right? And we know that there are these schools, people are not choosing these schools. And if they are, it's a very tiny, small number. And the city has had this experience before. There was a school in Brooklyn that at some point was not even designated as a school anymore. It was a program because it became so small that uh, it was not viable anymore as an actual school. But the city kind of waited until that happened to then actually close that school. The fiscal situation of the city was very different at the time. Now, we are having more fiscal challenges, and our expenses are growing faster than the income that the city takes. And so I do think that the city will not have the ability to deal with this problem in a more in a slower way than how it has happened before.
Yeah. What's the role of the teachers unions in this? Obviously, they don't want any employees impacted by budget cuts, which or fiscal responsibility. And in fact, they really pushed for a class size cap that would drive up their union roles. Is anyone in the union acknowledging the problem here, or are they contributing to the problem?
They're definitely contribute to the problem, and unfortunately, in New York City, the teachers unions have such an outsized role, and basically every decision that the GOE makes, you can trace back as benefiting the union's interest, right?
Mhm.
So right after COVID, when there was that huge drop in enrollment, they pushed for this class size law. And what it did, it was exactly what it said. There is a new now cap in the number of students, and it is a law that is applied across the board. So there are no exemptions, at all levels. And we have been now on a hiring spree, even though declining enrollment, right? And
Yeah.
the most absurd is that they are trying to now implement this law in schools that every single seat is filled because there's so much demand for that school. And the buildings are full, there's no space to create new classrooms. And the only way to implement this law, and some people have actually advocated for this, is to limit enrollment. So to admit fewer kids in those schools. So I always give the example of Stuyvesant, which is our most prestigious high school here. They
Mhm.
take roughly 800 students every year. And to implement class size law, you would have to admit fewer students. So that would be insanity because we would literally be limiting the number of students that have access to this really high quality education in our city, just to benefit the teachers unions. Because everybody in that building is getting access to an excellent education. There are so many kids applying who would love to be there. And that's not just Stuyvesant. There are a number of schools that are in this situation, and the only way to implement this law is going to be by limiting enrollment. The previous chancellor under Mayor Adams said that she would not allow limiting enrollment to implement the class size law. This chancellor has not said this yet, explicitly at least. And so we don't know what's going to happen. But the good news is that the city cannot afford this law. And so the mayor has negotiated in the latest budget negotiation to have a slower implementation timeline. So
Oh.
it's going to be a little bit on pause. I have said many times, this law, it's impossible to implement. It's too expensive. There is no space in the buildings, and we're not going to be creating new school buildings, on time to actually implement. And third, and most importantly, the schools where you would have to implement, you can only do by limiting enrollment. And I do think that the day that they actually try to do this, it's when the reaction from parents, when they are being told you cannot go to this school because
Yeah.
of class size law, I think there's going to be a huge backlash then.
So, teachers' unions are influencing the DOE in multiple ways. Are there other examples that you'd want to share of things that you've seen teachers' unions doing in the city that are harming student outcomes?
I think overall they have been pushed for lowering standards, for less testing. And New York has, at the state level, has lowered graduation requirements. It has lowered the standards for you to be proficient at the state test since COVID. They explicitly said at a state board meeting that they were going to accept that this is a new normal after COVID. And so they would reset the proficient level. And I had a first grader when they were doing this, and I remember thinking, I will never hold my first grader now at a lower level than my kid who is now in fifth grade. It's crazy as a mother to now say, "Oh, that's the new normal. We're just gonna expect less from you academically, right?" No parent would do that, but that's basically what the state was telling parents. They made it easier to pass the state test in order to hide the learning loss from COVID. So I think all of that are things that are being pushed by groups that are funded by the teacher union, by legislators who receive contributions from the teachers unions. And overall, it's really, there's a damaging impact on the New York children.
You've written about chronic absenteeism, and that is something I kind of feel like does not get the attention that it deserves. It doubled on average nationwide from 15% to 30% chronic absent. And people might think, well, okay, kids are missing some school and they're missing it regularly. Chronic absenteeism means that you're missing at least 10% of the school year, of the school days. And probably it's a lot more in many cases. And so the cities were hit really hard with the chronic absenteeism. What have you seen in New York on that front? And is it abating at all?
The increase was so high. So as you said, my report looked at 2 years ago, the data, and it was roughly a third of kids in New York City were chronically absent. That means you're missing one school day every 2 weeks. People always say, oh, people are now taking more vacation. That does
Mhm.
not make you chronically absent. Like you need to be consistently missing days. And it's getting a little better, but not enough. It's dropping, 1 or 2 percentage points per year, which is not going to get us to where we were before. And I think, as Nat Malkus from AEI always mentioned, it was already very high before COVID. It just now is extremely high, and it's across the board. Um, on that research, what really surprised me and made me so worried is that the chronic absenteeism was very high, even in early grades. So, kindergarten, first grade. And that is very worrying because, one, these kids are not going to school by themselves. So, there is an adult or caretaker that is making the decision that the child is not going to school. And a lot of the pushback that I got was, well, in 12th grade, when the kids are ready, they know what's happening. It's hard. I was like, no, this is happening at elementary schools. And if we know, we have so much research that shows that if you are chronically absent in at the lower grades, the likelihood that you are going to be not proficient, not being able to read, behind in middle school and high school, it's like striking. And so we're setting up these kids to really fail in school and in life later on. And I really think that this is the most important issue for us to solve a number of other issues in schools, right? I am deeply worried about academic performance. We're not going to improve academic performance if we don't deal with chronic absenteeism.
There was such a message from school districts that schools were a dangerous place during the COVID era. Stay home. Your child will be sick. They will be a vector for disease. They will make the vulnerable adults sick. And I don't know that anyone ever started sending a message otherwise, even when the school buildings opened up again. Would that be one of your solutions that you'd propose to tackle this? Tell people it's important, you need to come?
I think it's even worse because in New York City, schools were closed when bars, restaurants, gyms were all open. I always talk about this. I could go to the restaurant to have a dinner with a friend. I could go to the gym. My second grader could not go to school every day. And what that message is that school is not important, that school is not essential, that, the restaurant industry was more important than kids getting education. And I do think that in a lot of cities, our society absorbed that message, right? That this is not important, it's not essential, we're not going to prioritize this. Our elected leaders did not prioritize education and children during COVID. And I do think now we're still dealing with the impact of that.
There's hope out there. We've been hearing a lot about the Education Freedom Tax Credit, the Federal Scholarship Tax Credit. We talk about it a lot on this podcast with our guests. And there's news out of New York for families who are like, I'm tired of all of the stress of the residentially assigned public schools. They are exploring these other options, and they might have additional opportunity to do so when this federal scholarship tax credit kicks in next year, if the governor opts in, because that is a part of this implementation. The governors have to say, our state is in, students in our state can benefit from tax credit funded scholarships. There are different interpretations of Governor Hochul's position on this. What's your take on it?
So she has said in a meeting that she intends to opt in, which I think is a really great sign. I think now we need to see it actually happening. The next day, her staff said that they were going to look for poison bills when the regulations come out, which I think it's late summer. So it's not a done deal yet, but I do think that she talked about her intention. And I think that is driven by the fact that it's a no-brainer for states like New York and California to opt into the federal tax credit. So New York and California are two of the top 3 states that pay federal taxes. And regardless of New York and California opt-in or not, our taxpayers will be able to donate, and they will donate to this program. So if we don't opt in, the money is going to go to this and it's going to benefit low-income kids in other states. So I have friends in smaller states who are like, I really hope your state does not opt in because that will be very good for my state because we're going to get all this money that you guys are going to pay and, it's going to benefit low-income kids in my state. But if it really is a no-brainer, and I think that what is really important for people to understand is that it does not mean a voucher program. So this is a program that will benefit even public school students with other educational expenses. And so even if you're a public school or a charter school, you can still benefit. And God knows our kids in New York need extra tutoring, need help with other expenses. The New York Times had an article recently about how much money families are spending with other educational expenses and really struggling. It's really hard for many families. And so that would be such an important help. And I definitely hope that Governor Kathy Hochul and Governor Newsom will opt in.
What can families, community members do to hold her accountable, to ensure that she does?
I think it's really important to tell her that you want this. So it's really important for families to reach out to the governor. I had the link on my website on how you can send her a message. I encourage everybody because the reality is that she has a lot of powerful, interesting interest telling her to not opt in. And so she needs to know that this is something that New York families want and really communicate that. So that's what I think people can do is it's telling her, we need this help. We want this program. Please opt in.
I'd like to wrap up our Freedom to Learn conversations by tackling a myth. So is there a myth out there in education policy that bothers you the most and that you want to address today?
When I started, the myth was really that our schools were underfunded. There was so many conversations about our underfunded public schools, and if you go to a regular public school in New York City, you can still think that it is underfunded because it's not that you cannot see the $42,000 per people right in front of you, right? So I do think that it's still a myth. Our schools are not underfunded. We're just not spending the money well. New York City now is the most expensive public schools among large urban districts. We're spending $42,000 per child. This is only going to go up next year. The budget is increasing, as I told you, like around $3 billion. Enrollment is projected to decrease by 4%. So we're going to be spending a lot more money, but it's not that we can see the results of that money because there is so much, I think, waste and mismanagement. So I think that is still, a myth that I would love to debunk.
I bet a tiny percentage of New Yorkers would believe you if you said that the city was spending more than $40,000 per pupil. They walk by the buildings. They don't look fancy. They know what it's like inside. It's not so great. And certainly we're seeing the outcomes. And like you said, New York City is middle of the pack. And middle of the pack is not good because the pack's not doing well. To be clear, the majority of students are not proficient in math and reading, and those are not 40,000 plus per pupil outcomes that we want for sure. How can people follow your work?
Well, definitely at the Manhattan Institute, I write a lot for City Journal, our online magazine, and I also have a Substack called Families for New York.
Well, Danyela, thank you for your commitment to education freedom, to common sense education policy, and thank you for joining Freedom to Learn.
Thank you so much for having
me. Freedom to Learn is a production of the Defense of Freedom Institute. Learn more about our work at dfipolicy.org. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Send feedback, questions, and episode ideas to podcast@dfipolicy.org. And if you enjoyed today's conversation, please follow and review Freedom to Learn on your favorite podcast app and share it with a friend.